Hi guys. So in today's video I'll be asking what has happened to free speech in the UK and why, because things have gotten fairly dystopian over the last sort of 10 or 20 years, and I think more people are waking up to it now, but not everybody, and I don't think people are quite aware how bad the situation is. And I also think it can serve as a cautionary tale for people in other countries. So part of the reason I decided to make this video, I mean, I've always been interested in this topic, and there have been a lot of somewhat high profile cases, I would say kind of medium profile cases, that have jumped out to me over the years as being very bizarre and extreme and frightening. And there's been one recently, the case of Maxie Allen. He and his wife were arrested in front of their 3-year-old disabled daughter by 6 police officers. 6 police officers came to their door. They were arrested for private messages they shared in a WhatsApp group complaining about the school. None of these messages were particularly hateful, or, you know, they didn't even, they weren't using slurs, they weren't talking about anybody's appearance, they weren't, you know, even had they been doing those things, I personally don't believe that those things should be considered crimes. But in this case, they hadn't even done anything outside of just the absolute norm. Just, I mean, completely normal stuff. This was, the worst message that they were able to dig out. They haven't been told why they were arrested, but the worst message they were able to dig out was one where they referred to one of the members of staff as a control freak, which is, fairly normal. Like, if any of you have kids and you socialise with other parents, you can probably remember saying things like that. You can probably think back and remember you and other parents discussing various teachers and probably saying much worse things than "she's a control freak." And the sad thing is, this case, whilst it's high profile, partially because Maxie Allen is a Times radio producer, I believe, which helped to make the case more high profile, this isn't abnormal. This isn't, to me, shocking as someone who's been following this for years. Thankfully, some of these cases are garnering more public attention, and there's been a lot of high profile ones recently. But this isn't something new. And this isn't something out of the ordinary, unfortunately, for this kind of heavy-handed police response to, something that isn't even a crime really by their own definition. Although the problem is, which I'll get into, that the laws are so subjective that basically anything can be a crime. We have the Malicious Communications Act of 1988, and that criminalises sending messages that are grossly offensive, indecent, obscene, or menacing, which again is subjective. Grossly offensive is very subjective. Technically, the Malicious Communications Act requires proof of intent. So they have to prove that you intended to be offensive or obscene or menacing, which is a strange thing to try and prove. It's also, proving that you intended to be obscene is kind of strange. A lot of TV comedies, a lot of jokes we make, a lot of completely ordinary things are intended to be obscene, and that might be where the comedy in them comes from, or the character or expressiveness of what you're saying. So intending to be obscene is, again, like quite there's a lot of subjectivity there that can be exploited. But then we had, under Tony Blair, the Communications Act of 2003, which made it illegal to send, again, grossly offensive messages via online or telephone communication. And as far as I'm aware, this is what most people are arrested. This law is what the law that most people are arrested under for these kinds of cases. And this doesn't require proof of intent. So they've actually done away with any illusion of objectivity, and have basically said if someone considers this offensive, then it can be considered a crime. So this becomes the main problem, is how unbelievably subjective these laws are. And they're kind of necessarily subjective. You can't really govern speech in this way without the laws being extremely subjective. But even with that in mind, even considering that it's basically impossible to govern speech without incredibly subjective laws, at least when we talk about offence and hatred and these kinds of concepts. I think incitement of violence is more of an objective thing, but a bit more. But when we talk about offence or hatred or things like this, they are necessarily subjective. But the 2003 Communications Act is, even by these standards, extremely subjective and open to interpretation, which basically means the entire thing is a mess. So you can have comedy shows on TV that are 10, 20 times more offensive or vulgar or hateful or whatever than something that someone is arrested for. And you can have extreme proclamations of hatred or abusive behavior that it doesn't, in the eyes of the law, warrant arrest. And then you can have, on the other hand, extremely minor, bizarre instances where the subjectivity of these laws are taken basically to the nth degree. One example was in 2008, a girl named Chelsea Russell. Look into this case; it's unbelievable. She had someone at the school she went to, or in the town she lived in, died. I believe in a car accident they died, and she was a white girl, I should add. The Chelsea Russell, the girl who was arrested, and she put a rap lyric in her Instagram bio, quoting a rap lyric that was in tribute to this person who had died. And the lyric that she quoted in her Instagram bio had the N-word in it. And we're talking about the N-word with an A at the end. So it wasn't intended as hateful. It wasn't intended as a slur. She was quoting a rap lyric. She was a 15-year-old girl. And she was arrested for this. And this was deemed by numerous people to be sufficiently hateful, malicious, or offensive for her to be arrested, to be given an ankle bracelet and put under house arrest. Eventually the case was overturned, but this was after a huge legal drama, and this happens in a lot of these cases. People's lives are briefly turned completely upside down. They're terrorized. They're completely afraid of what's going to happen to them. They're threatened and intimidated. And thankfully, sometimes, eventually, common sense wins, and someone with a brain says, no, this is ridiculous. This isn't a crime. That doesn't always happen. That happens often in the high-profile cases that get a lot of attention, basically. So as soon as something makes it into the papers and a lot of fuss is generated and a lot of people get angry, these cases are more likely to be overturned, which is part of what happened with the Times radio producer Maxie Allen, who was arrested for private messages in a WhatsApp group. So, and it doesn't actually, people will say this a lot, oh, well, the case was overturned. Yeah, I mean, if you were put on an ankle bracelet and you were forced to go to court and you were threatened and you were told, you were threatened with severe sanctions or punishments for something as petty and trivial and bizarre and minor as that, you wouldn't say, oh, good, it was overturned. You wouldn't feel that justice had been done because it was overturned. You'd think, no, I shouldn't have ever been arrested in the first place. It never should have happened to me. That's completely ridiculous and insane and dystopian. And it could have easily gone the other way. There is an increasingly censorial sentiment growing in the legal system amongst judges, and I do also think that whilst judges sometimes dismiss these cases, I think it's getting worse in that regard. I think judges are dismissing less of them, or at least they're dismissing them at a lower rate. There are more cases, full stop, so there might be more cases for judges to dismiss, but I think the judges are being swept up in whatever this ideology, this mindset is, that you can control everything that people do and you can control everything that goes on in society, and that you should, in fact, try to control everything that goes on between people. So one of the problems that comes up a lot is people say, well, this thing that this person said or this joke that someone made was wrong. It was hurtful. It was rude. It was offensive. And the implication being that because this person said something wrong or offensive or rude, or because it hurt someone, that therefore an arrest is warranted and that it's understandable that the authorities try and intervene in this way, which is a very odd idea when you think about it, really. I mean, like, the government are not there to control every aspect of society. The government are there to maintain a kind of basic level of order, and the rest is for us to figure out amongst ourselves. For example, if you cheat on your partner, you don't go to prison for it, right? Now, cheating on your partner is a horrible thing to do, and in many, if not most cases, is extremely traumatizing for people. It's extremely painful for them. It causes them a lot more harm than a mean social media post is likely to cause, or a mean joke that you are the butt of. Probably most of the time, being cheated on by a long-term partner is going to be like a much more traumatizing and painful thing than an insult or a joke. Not necessarily, but most likely. We don't have any expectation of the authorities intervening there. We understand that this is not something we really want the law or the government involved with. It's not really their business. It's a kind of self-regulating, socially regulating thing. It's something where, if you keep doing that, you will develop a reputation for it. People won't trust you, and you'll destroy your own relationships. And of course, it has a lot of consequences for other people that can't be taken back. But that's just something that people have to kind of navigate on their own. And we understand that. We understand not only is it not right for the law to get involved with things like that, but it's actually not practical at all. There's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough resources. I think the same is obvious when it comes to policing speech. There are things I've seen people be arrested for where I think, yeah, I don't like what that person said. I don't think it was very nice. I don't think it was, I didn't like that comment or that joke or whatever it was. That doesn't mean it should be a crime. The problem with these laws as well is that if these laws were enforced actively, were enforced to their full extent, if the precedent that's been set legally was applied across the board to the entire country, it would literally be applied to the entire country. There are no grown adults who have never said anything offensive or hateful or mean in their lives. That doesn't exist. There is nobody who has never said anything that could have them arrested under these laws. It's not possible, it's not practical, it's not right, it's not reasonable to try and govern speech in this way, particularly when we deal with the very subjective aspects of speech. When you talk about incitement of violence, incitement to murder, I think that's a separate issue. If you're a criminal and you have a criminal gang and you say, go and kill this person, that's a crime, in my opinion. That should always be a crime. And there's a thin line there, because you could be someone who has a huge following on the internet and you make a post like Khabib, the UFC fighter, made about Macron, which in my opinion was borderline. There was a bit too much subjectivity there for my tastes, but I mean, he was basically asking his followers to go and disfigure and maim and potentially kill Emmanuel Macron. And I'm by no means a fan of Emmanuel Macron, but nor am I a fan of Khabib after reading what he said about him. And it was a very, the subtext to what he wrote was extremely violent and aggressive and really terroristic. It was a difficult one because he didn't exactly say it. He said it kind of indirectly. And those are the difficult cases, and those are the problems we should be facing. Those are the difficult questions we should be asking. We do, whatever happens, we will always have a difficult problem on our hands with the grey area between, a criminal ordering a hit or someone saying, I think it would be really great if someone did this to, whoever, some politician that they don't like. I think it would be, they say to their million followers, wouldn't it be great if someone, killed so-and-so or attacked so-and-so? God, that would be brilliant. Or the Kathy Griffin one holding up, Trump's severed head. I don't really see that one as being a crime myself, or something that should be a crime. I don't know. I haven't really given it much thought, to be honest. It's irrelevant because people don't really tend to get arrested for things like that in America. Although, I mean, incitement of violence is one of the few things you can be arrested for there. So I would say we would need some very, very, very rigid, very clearly written, very objective laws about incitement of violence. And sometimes a judge might go a little bit outside of those laws when it's necessary, or maybe when the judge has incorrectly perceived it as his place or her place to do so. But that would be a very, very different issue. And I do also think it's kind of easy to be careful about that. It's kind of easy to think, okay, well, I guess there was a good example. We had a good example in the UK. They were talking about, I think it was Nigel Farage being milkshaked. And Joe Brand, the comedian, said, "Oh, why not battery acid?" Which is, I understand people hate Nigel Farage. I'm not his biggest fan either, to be honest. But, I mean, imagine someone saying that about you. And this is someone as well. He has a family. He has children. Like, someone saying, throw battery acid in his face when you've already been attacked in public numerous times. And whatever you think, a climate where we attack politicians because we don't like the things they do or say is quite intense, and that's going to come back around to any and all types of politicians, not just the ones that you or I might particularly dislike at the time. And it's just a horrible standard to set for ourselves, like for a grown woman to say that, and I understand she was kind of joking, and I don't think she really thought it through in that way. So again, that would be a difficult one to me, because she wasn't saying go and throw battery acid in his face. She said, why not battery acid? Which is, it's difficult. And I think those cases are difficult. I mean, I don't believe maybe she was arrested. I don't think she was. Those cases are difficult and always will be. And that is where the difficulty should lie when it comes to free speech, in my opinion, because you can't nowadays allow people who have big audiences. You imagine some of the people who are not exactly terrorists, but basically terrorist adjacent, religious extremists who are the kind of socially acceptable face of terrorism, who do YouTube and live streams and stuff, and they manage to say things and, a bit like Habib did, where like they never really say what they're really saying, and those people can very easily do that. They can very easily have someone become a target for murder or assault. And so, that's something that we do need to look very carefully at. Then we have other cases where, I mean, when it comes to incitement of violence and things like that, it would be a big but necessary use of our resources, right? I mean, because the police force are understaffed in the UK. The prisons are packed full. It's very difficult. There's not really the money there to build new prisons. There's not much money to put more police on the streets. There's a knife crime epidemic. There's huge amounts of petty crime, shoplifting, vandalism, antisocial behaviour. There's a lot of disorder on the streets of the UK, and huge amounts of money. We're talking, some estimates would say between 3,000 to 6,000 people a year are arrested for these kinds of non-violent kind of, hate speech or malicious speech offences online every year. Now, most of those people are not prosecuted in the end, but arrests are very expensive. Police time is very expensive, especially when you're looking at things like 6 officers turning up to arrest, a posh couple who have no criminal record and no history of violence towards police and are very unlikely to say no just to being asked to come in. That was what he said. Why didn't they if they just phoned us and said, we'd like to speak to you about this, come in for an interview, they would have gone. There was no reason to believe that they were going to flee the country because of something they said in a private WhatsApp group calling someone a control freak. There's no reason to be so heavy-handed and aggressive with them, but of course they were. That is enormously expensive. I don't think people quite realise the thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds it costs to send the police there, to file the reports in the first place, to send the police there, to conduct the interviews, the investigation, a 5-week investigation. The amount of money that costs the taxpayer is insane, like absolutely insane. Far more than what one person contributes in taxes during that 5-week period. I mean, it's like a ridiculous amount of money that costs, while we have so much other crime and so the police most of the time in the UK, if you're burgled, or if you have your phone snatched in public, or your bike is stolen, sometimes even if your car is stolen, they don't even really think about investigating it. They come round, maybe they might just speak to you over the phone and say, all right, sorry to hear that, here's a crime number. That's it. That's kind of the end of the investigation. They don't really do anything. And at the same time, they're arresting 15-year-old girls for quoting rap lyrics in their Instagram bio, and we're spending money on all the the ankle bracelet monitoring and the court appearances. And again, court cases are like insanely expensive for the taxpayer, for the public. So yeah, if we're going to have difficult cases, it should be those. It should be ones that are genuinely difficult, that do pose difficult questions about language and how we use it, like Joe Brand's joke. There was a similar. We had a probably some of you know the Count Dankula case. He was a YouTube comedian who. He dressed his girlfriend's dog as a Nazi, and he made it do Nazi salutes, and he made it say, I feel even I have to be, it's so ridiculous I even have to be, told it to do something to the Jews, something that, the Nazis did to the Jews. He told the dog to say that, or he said that to the dog or something. And the whole point of the video was that it was shocking and extreme and absurd to see a dog dressed as a Nazi doing Nazi salutes. And he did it to upset his girlfriend because she loved her dog. So he tried to make his dog be as horrible as possible. That was the joke. It's obviously just shocking humour, edgy humour, deliberately designed to be offensive, because that's the joke. The joke is that it's offensive. So the joke only works if you understand that that's offensive. If you don't think that's offensive, the joke isn't funny, it's not a joke. So the whole point of it being a joke is that we all agree that it's wrong to do that to Jewish people. We all agree that it's wrong to do a Nazi salute. We all agree that it's not nice. The idea of your dog being a Nazi is not a nice thing. That's the point of the joke. So the joke only works if you accept that, being a Nazi is bad. He was threatened with prison time for that. In the end, I think he was forced to pay a £500 fine. There was a huge, again, I think like Stephen Fry and Ricky Gervais and lots of other people got involved. And ironically, Graham Linehan, the creator of Black Books and the IT Crowd and Father Ted, he piled on against Count Dankula and said that he was right, and that said that it was right for him to be arrested. He said that it was okay for him to be arrested. He said it was the correct thing to do and that he deserved it because he was this or that and he was right wing and this and that, and he shouldn't have made that video, etc., etc. Fast forward to a few years later, Graham Linehan, who is famously what is referred to on the internet as a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist. So he's friends with a lot of feminists, and they're unhappy about the impact the transgender movement is having on our society, and particularly on women. And he was arrested for comments that he made. And I think some of his friends were arrested for comments that they made. And he now believes in free speech because it's affected him. I'm never really comfortable with Graham Linehan because he's apologised, and he said he was wrong, and he said he's apologised for what he said about Count Dankula. He said he was wrong, and he's now part of the kind of somehow a kind of strange bedfellow in the kind of anti-woke, kind of free speech, sort of right-wing sphere, just by way of having a kind of shared enemy. I'm not entirely comfortable with that. I find it a bit weird. I don't, Graham Linehan wasn't a young man when he was piling on to a guy who was being arrested for a silly joke. And by the way, there are plenty of silly, potentially offensive jokes in Graham Linehan's comedy, and the shows he wrote over the years that were broadcast on TV. And he was piling on to a young guy who was facing prison, being taken away from his family and being in danger probably as well. UK prisons are not as dangerous as some other prisons, but they're still quite dangerous and very unpleasant places, and a lot of people, kill themselves. And he piled on then. He wasn't, this wasn't a mistake he made when he was young. He was a fully grown, middle-aged man when he did that, and then when it came back around to hurt him, he thought, oh, okay, and now I see why this is wrong. And okay, we have to accept people's apologies and allow people the room to grow and change, but to me that's not a great reason to grow and change. It's not great to grow and change just because this problem that you contributed to now affects you. So I hope that the public who don't care about this issue don't have to learn in that way, because that will happen sooner or later. These laws that are put into place now that may well favour your political viewpoint. I mean, if you're on the left, most of the time these hate speech laws in particular affect people you don't like, or affect things that you don't like. So it tends to be people who are a bit more on the right, or it tends to be people who are the left tend to be more censorial nowadays. Not just the politicians, but the left voting public in their thinking tend to be more censorial. It wasn't always the case. It was very different, 30 years ago perhaps. But nowadays, yeah. And so the idea of someone being arrested for a hate crime, something like, or hate speech against a minority group, is something that's more popular among people on the left than it is among people on the right. But these laws that are being brought in can and will affect people of any political persuasion, and that really comes down to who's in power at the time. And I don't just mean who's democratically elected, because there's a lot of people who aren't democratically elected who are very much in power. It comes down to who's in power at the time, but of course the democratically elected figures are also very important there, and yeah, what the kind of social tides of the time are. So if we were looking at a repeat of McCarthyism, it would be people on the left being arrested for ridiculous accusations of being communists, for example, as opposed to people on the right being arrested, or people in the centre a lot of the time, for accusations of being far right or a Nazi or a white supremacist or whatever it is. The laws are subjective enough that it doesn't really matter who you are or what you believe. They can affect you, and in terms of your political leaning, they will. Things will change in that regard. We've seen some of that already. Before Labour were elected, I didn't follow this story hugely closely, to be honest, but there were the protests about the King, and people were arrested there, and there was also been the imprisonment of the Just Stop Oil people. That's a kind of different story, because they did commit some fairly extreme acts. I do think 5 years was a bit much, and I very much don't like Just Stop Oil. I don't agree with the alleged scientific basis for what they say. I don't agree with their methodology. I don't like them as people. I think they're horrible, and it's a cult. But 5 years is quite heavy, I think, when you look at the fact that the prisons are so full that people are being released after a couple of years, or sometimes after murders. I mean, people, there was one case, a guy killed another teenage boy with a machete, and he was eligible for early release after something like 2.5 years of his sentence. And this was when they were packing the prisons full with people who were many of whom committed non-violent crimes during the riots, and at the same time saying the prisons are so full we have to release people who've committed murder, or manslaughter. So to give 5 years to these eco-protesters as a first, for most of them, their first real offence, their first custodial sentence, bit much. And it does go to show that these legal frameworks affect all of us. When you think of them in terms of left versus right, you lose. That's it. You have to think of them in terms of us versus them, as in us people, us citizens, versus the people who control us ultimately and who we lend power to. We lend it to them in good faith, but we lend them power. We don't give it to them. They might feel like we give it to them, but we don't give it to them, and we shouldn't give it to them. We lend it to them. And who should be scrutinized at every opportunity and never blindly trusted. And if they can dangle something in front of your face and go, oh, look, you're left wing, or oh, you're right wing, here you go, have this. This will suit you. Then you've lost, basically. Like, you have to look at what this represents for us as citizens over the long term, not just immediately, not just does it allow you a win over your political enemies, but what does this really mean for all of us as a society, and how could this backfire, or how could this give an undue level of power to people who shouldn't have that level of power? I have to challenge myself in this regard. There are cases I see, there are things I see that happen, not in the UK, to be fair, in America and other countries, where I go, yeah, I like that. I'm glad. I don't like these people. I'm glad. And that happened a bit with the Just Stop Oil thing. At first, I kind of laughed because I really don't like what they do. I think it's really like deeply wrong to vandalize a Van Gogh painting or to block roads. I think it's horrible. So I saw the sentences and I was like, wow. And I kind of was excited. And then I thought, it's not right, really. It's just not right. And I have to check myself a lot. And I think we all should check ourselves and not allow because that's how it's the left-right political division, which seems to be getting worse and worse all the time, is used to manipulate you into, to a lot of these people, it's irrelevant, to be honest. To most people in politics, I'd say their priorities are, number one, what do the people who really control things and who control the money and who basically own everything and who are their masters and who allow them to win elections, what do those people want? That's number one. Two, how can they get elected and stay in power and stay rich and stay famous? Three, probably third, is what they really believe. And most of the time that becomes very blurry. The more powerful they become, the more that seems to blur into something kind of meaningless. So most of the time when left-right politics are used as a way of garnering support for a particular idea or getting one side of the public behind it, it's just a manipulation tactic. They're not really thinking, oh, this is brilliant. This is a really good idea. This is really going to benefit everybody. And a lot of the time, they're not even thinking this will really benefit the left or this will really benefit the right. They're just thinking like they're not even thinking this will benefit my electorate. They're just thinking. Well, there are a lot of things they're thinking, but a lot of the time they're thinking about the power this will give them, and there's lots of different motives. But the point is that that's the easiest way to get people to support things that they might not otherwise support. So yeah, there's been a ton of these cases, many of them, as I said, very frightening and bizarre. We had a man who was arrested in front of his family. There's a video of it online. He shared a meme, and it was the pride flag, and it was like sliced down the middle, and the other half was a swastika with the colours of the pride flag or something like that. It was basically a mashup of the pride flag and a swastika, which is a kind of silly, a slightly embarrassing form of, a slightly cringe form of satire. It's a bit on the nose. It's not something I would see and go, yeah, I do have my questions and my doubts about the pride movement as it is today, not the concept, but the movement itself. But it's not something I would personally share, but not because I think it's so hateful or wrong. It's a form of completely harmless and completely ideologically acceptable satire you're basically saying this movement is akin to Nazism because of its authoritarianism, because of how dogmatic it is, because it's like a totalitarian ideology, because it's aggressive or whatever it is. So again, in this example, you have to accept at the outset that being a Nazi is a bad thing before you can even take in the message of this. Because someone who was a Nazi, someone who was really far right white supremacist Nazi, to them that's not an insult to be compared to a Nazi. They like Nazis, they have swastika tattoos. So for that particularly tiny minority of people who actually feel that way, that's not even, it doesn't make sense. The satire doesn't make sense. It doesn't read. We see a lot of satire like this. We see, for example, Trump with a Hitler moustache, or a lot of like Banksy paintings. It's like it's childish, a very childish form of satire. A lot of Banksy's paintings, I think, are again like very childish and silly. It's like, what if a Molotov cocktail was a flower? It's just like, yeah, what if it was, man? What's the point of this? This is shit. But it's a lot of stuff like that, and there's a lot of stuff using Nazi iconography to compare something else to Nazism, and it's most of the time it's just kind of it's just stupid, really. And it doesn't really tell you anything. It's very, very shallow satire. It's the equivalent of, those paintings where it's someone like shooting up heroin, but the heroin is Facebook or something, and you're meant to be like, whoa, man, Facebook is like heroin. It's that level of like sort of artistic and satirical merit, I would say. But offensive or hateful, like, no, it's not. It's just not. First of all, he's talking about an actual organisation. This isn't just a social movement, it's an actual organisation, a registered organisation. It's like BLM. BLM's not just an idea, BLM is an organisation. If you can't criticise a huge organisation worth millions that has a power structure and everything, as an individual you can't criticise that in a satirical fashion, what can you do? What are you free to do? So he was arrested for this. Again, a huge group of officers came to his house to very aggressively attempt to arrest him. I don't remember what happened in the end in that case. We had David Starkey was arrested he did a podcast with a guy called Darren Grimes. He was on his podcast and he was talking about the idea of whether or not slavery is a genocide. And he said, well, no, it wasn't a genocide. His words were, because if it was a genocide, there wouldn't be so many damn blacks. And to be fair, I like David Starkey. I don't think he needed to phrase it in that way. I felt that was a bit, for someone who's very, very eloquent as he is, it was a strange choice of words. But the word damn can emphasize a point, like, I'm so damn rich, or it can be like, these damn people who I hate, So again, very subjective. I did think, like, I could understand why if someone was there, for example, and would say, why did you say it like that? It sounds like you're angry that there's black people. It sounds very hateful. It sounds mean to say it like that. And I would be inclined to agree. I'd think, yeah, they have every right to say that to him. They have every right to sort of ask him why he said it like that. And I'm sure he would respond in kind and be happy to have a conversation about it and to say, oh, I didn't mean it like that, or to say, oh, well, I don't really care that you think that, or whatever it was. But just to have a normal human interaction, to have a disagreement with someone, to think someone was offensive or to think what they said was wrong, and to not need the police involved. Now, him and the host were both arrested and questioned for this. The host didn't do anything. He was just hosting the podcast. It's like, it's a perfect example because, again, like, yeah, I mean, I could understand why if I was black, I wouldn't really like the way he said it. I would have thought, oh, it sounds a bit mean. Why did you say it like that? That doesn't mean I'd want him to be arrested for it. Doesn't mean I want the government involved. Doesn't mean I want, sometime in the future the government to arrest me for something I've said, because now things have changed and now it's me who's considered offensive or out of touch, or my ideas are outdated, and now I'm going to be the one who's facing punishment for it, and I'm going to do a Graham Linehan. And by the way, a lot of people are going to do a Graham Linehan. A lot of people already are, And a lot of people will in the future. And there'll be a lot of people saying, yeah, I was wrong. I'm sorry. I didn't realise how important free speech is until it affected me. So, like, anyone who's on the fence about this, I would implore you, don't be one of those people, because you're very likely to end up one of those people when you begin to see how this can affect you. And I've always felt, not that this was necessarily some grand master plan, but that these ideas end up benefiting the people, these rules end up benefiting the people who are responsible for them, who are responsible for upholding them. So over the long term, forget left, right, this and that, what's going to really benefit the powers that be? I would say during the riots we saw, whilst some of them, I mean, some people were arrested literally for putting like gun emojis and saying like kill someone or something. And I differ from a lot of free speech advocates in that I don't think you should really be allowed to do that. I don't necessarily agree, particularly if it's like a first offence and you don't have a track record as a terrorist or anything. I think probably the best thing would be like a talking to and them to say you can't really say stuff like that on the internet. That's kind of like a death threat and whatever, and you shouldn't do that, and it might scare you and you'd go okay. And then if you do it again, they could say, look, you're clearly invested in trying to incite violence and whatever. But regardless, yeah, I don't think you should be allowed to sort of encourage violence, particularly at a time when there was actually violence going on. Like, I should know there was violence going on in both directions, but that doesn't really get covered. But particularly at a time that was like that, you know, if you're putting gun emojis to someone's head and stuff, or one of them, he was saying he told people to burn down a hotel. That I don't think is that's not a free speech issue. You know, you're telling people to burn down a hotel. That's not about opinions or ideas or subjectivity. You're just telling people to do something, you know, very violent that could kill a lot of people. But at the same time, a lot of people were arrested for things that were completely non-violent, that were not encouraging or inciting violence, and they were arrested in this way to control a situation in the most beneficial possible way for the standing government at the time. The most unpalatable possible solution for the government at the time would be to say, okay, there's this huge amount of unrest, and basically we're going to some extent to acknowledge the underlying concerns whilst also punishing anyone who breaks the law. But like, you know, the underlying concerns are valid, or here's what we plan to do to fix this situation long term, rather than just punish people for speaking about it now. But that was very inconvenient, and it's not something that in my opinion, the political framework of our country really allows anyone to do. It's not a problem. The immigration issue is not one that is really able to be dealt with by politicians. They don't really have a choice, in my opinion. I don't think they're given the freedom really to deal with it without kind of going against their masters. So it's not something they even want to talk about or discuss, and it's very inconvenient for them. So it's much easier to go, oh no, these people who are making a lot of fuss about it, that's hate speech. That's malicious communications. Arrest them, scare everyone else. No one else wants to say anything anymore. Like, and I saw it happen. People who were very vocal about all of this. And again, yes, some people who were probably overstepping the line, and then the vast, vast, vast majority who weren't, who were very vocal about everything that was going on. And I watched them all immediately become a lot more timid, a lot more careful in what they said, and clearly afraid of being arrested. And that was the idea. That was the intention. And it worked. So this power that was given to the government was used to benefit the government, really. That was the only people it was used to benefit. They weren't doing it because they really believe in your rights or my rights or your future or my future. They're doing it because they're going, no, we're not dealing with this thing. We're not going to deal with it in any other way other than we need to make them shut the fuck up as quickly as possible because this is completely inconvenient and it's causing a problem for us. Imagine 10 years down the line, say the environmental stuff has really exploded, or animal rights or something like this, one of these issues, or there's been some kind of change in the law regarding, for example, like being gay or trans or something. And lots of people are really up in arms about this. People who would presumably be on the left are really up in arms about it. And these kinds of laws will just be used to intimidate people into silence in that case as well, depending on who's in power, depending on what the prevailing trends or the desired trajectory of the global elite is at the time. So then these same laws will be used in the same way, but on different people. And ultimately, again, who will the beneficiaries be? The beneficiaries will be the people who control us, the middle managers, aka, the prime minister, the elected politicians of the time, who are the middle managers, who are designated to deal with us, vermin, us peasants. It will benefit them and it will make their life easier. That's what it's there for. It's not there really to achieve any particular political goal, because if it was, it wouldn't be structured in that way. If you really want to end hate, you want to create unity, and there are better ways to do that, really. But this is something that conveniently allows whoever's in office at the time, and that's why this was really put into motion by Tony Blair's Labour. But the Tories had 17 years to get rid of this, and they didn't, because why would they? Why would they give away power? So even if really it's not something they necessarily would have pushed for to begin with, and it's probably something that quite a lot of Tory MPs might take issue with, at the same time, they're thinking, well, no, we're not going to give away power. The whole thing is a fight for power in politics. Their entire existence is trying to have as much power over us as they can. Why would they give that away once they've got it? So the more power we give the government, it's a slippery slope in a number of ways. And, we have to be tight-fisted because they're going to be tight-fisted. So when we start going, oh, okay, here you go, you can have this, they grab hold of that and it's theirs. And it's very, very, very hard to change that. It's very hard to win back civil liberties that you've given away by choice. And we've given away a lot, and a lot of boogeymen are used to make us give away our civil liberties. And where this is headed is that it's unfortunately likely to get worse and worse and worse, because what governments, particularly in Europe, have seen is that it doesn't matter what you do and how people feel about it if there's no viable alternative. So to take the immigration issue, for example, I'm not intending to get into that because it's too much of a contentious issue to get into on this channel, and it's a lot less of a philosophical issue, I would say, in some ways than this. But if you take that issue as an example, the vast majority of the public think it needs to be controlled. The vast majority of the public think it's the number one issue on their minds during elections, and yet no government will do anything about it, and all they'll do is make it worse. They're able to do that because we have a sense of learned helplessness, and we know it doesn't. They're not. They basically can. They can. If we know there's no alternative, then what can we do about it? We've voted against it for years, and they've gone, oh yeah, we've heard that, but they're not going to fix it. We're not going to fix it. There's two parties, the uni-party, as people call it, that are basically the same, and whichever one you vote for, they're not going to do anything about it. And this is the same in a lot of European countries, and it will be the same thing with free speech. You might vote for a party who say, yeah, we'll fix this, we'll deal with it, and then they get in and they go, oh no, well, we're not going to deal with it. Oh well, here's some other reasons to vote for us, and you probably prefer us to the other one anyway if you voted for us in the first place, so you'll probably vote for us again because you don't really have a choice. And so for that reason, this has the capacity, I hope it doesn't, but this has the capacity to get a lot worse. And I was saying this 10 years ago to people, trust me, this is not a good situation. And people would say, but isn't it just people are arrested for saying something hateful? Isn't it just, they're saying they're trying to protect people. They're trying to protect minorities. They couldn't give a fuck. They're not trying to protect minorities. They don't care. They're not trying to protect minorities. It's not a sincere, really deeply held belief in making sure that these people are okay. It's not about that. And all it's really doing is giving power to the government, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And by the time it's gotten bad enough that everyone has woken up, it's too late to do anything about. And that's what we're seeing, is people very slowly waking up to something that they should have woken up to 10 years ago or more if they weren't being kind of partisan about it, you know? As for the rest of Europe, I mean, the funny thing is, the legal framework for this kind of stuff exists in lots of European countries. It's much worse in the UK. We're as far as I'm aware, we are by far the strictest country in the world with this stuff. We don't have political censorship in the same way other countries do, although this is in fact unofficially a form of political censorship because it censors ideas that are inconvenient to the powers that be. We've seen that in Ireland, we've seen that here. So it is a form of political censorship really, because it shuts up anyone who's making a fuss basically about certain topics, and it can be used on a whim to silence people. But it will get to the point where it's overtly political, where it's outright political censorship. It will get to that, or it can get to that point if we allow it. And people think that these things can't happen to us. They can. And so much of the time, these things, they start for good reasons, or for what seem like good reasons, you know? Other European countries, they have most of them have the legal framework for this as well. There's very few countries that have constitutionally protected freedom of speech. America is the only one really. Estonia has it. There's an Asian country, I think it's maybe Malaysia or Singapore or one of those countries, but it doesn't extend to criticizing that country itself, but basically everything else. There's a few countries that have it, but a tiny handful, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. Most European countries have a similar-ish framework, not as extreme legally to the UK, and so this can come to you in France or Spain or Italy or wherever you are in Europe or in the world. This can come to you. That precedent hasn't quite been set yet, and the ball hasn't started rolling yet, you know. Although in Germany, and I think maybe Austria, or maybe just Austria, I don't know, a lot of people are now, no, it's Germany, a lot of people are now being arrested for similar crimes, for ridiculous crimes. One woman was arrested for things she said about an illegal migrant who raped her. She was arrested for, I believe, sending him like malicious communications or something. It was ridiculous. I mean, it really was like ridiculous, like terrifying. And yeah, so this isn't, you know, this is a I would say a goal of the European Union is to police and control speech, a weird mix of some sort of demented ideological thing and also just a deranged thirst, like never-ending thirst for power. So it's certainly a European Union thing, and that's spreading across those individual countries in the European Union. But I think initially people are reluctant to take that first step. I think the powers that be are kind of like, oh, really, we can, you know, is this a thing we can do? And then once they realise it is a thing that they can do, they just do it. And they carry on doing it, and they go, oh yeah, well, yeah, people are upset about that, but haven't done anything, have they? So we're going to keep doing it. And that's what's happened in the UK. They've gone, oh yeah, people are complaining about the thousands of arrests that are made every year for this. Okay, we've heard your complaints, we don't care, we're going to keep doing it. And that's what's happening. And once the ball gets rolling in these other countries, and I think it may already be in more of them than I realise, that's what will happen. So yeah. Don't let them. We mustn't let them. We can't think of this as a left and right political issue. The freedom to express yourself, the freedom of speech, the freedom to have disagreements or dislike of other people, or to hate each other, or to offend each other. Those are just basic fundamental freedoms. There's a human rights. There's not a right-wing issue or a left-wing issue. It's just a human issue. It's just something that we deserve and have the right to. And it's part of what makes us human. And you can hate things that I say, and I can hate things that you say, and I can say bad things about you, and you can say, oh, I don't like this person, I don't want anything to do with him, he's a prick. And, you know, under the Malicious Communications Act, I could have you arrested for calling me a prick. But I don't want to, you know. So, yeah, anyway, that's all. Yeah, that's all. All right, thanks for watching, guys.